Hi, I'm Bill Stevenson, and I'm here to talk about a series of classes we're going to have for the Passages class in September, starting September 9th, going through a four-part series ending September 30th. And the title of the series is The Holy Land, Israel Palestine. The purpose of this series really is to discuss what we saw a little bit, the audience being for people who have been there or who would like to go there, who are planning to go there, or for anybody who wants to have a historical perspective of the Holy Land. Okay, well, thanks to everybody for coming again to this session. And I was just at this morning's service, and actually that kind of says it all, I think, because that service is about love thy enemies, Leviticus and Matthew. And that's kind of what we're missing here in the whole 4,000 years. There's not a whole lot of love going on. That's for sure. Let me just open with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, where there is hatred and division, please sow the seeds of peace. Where there is destruction and ruin, please help us rebuild and renew. Where there are children crying, please help bring an end to the tears. Show us how to break the barriers of history and breathe whispers of hope and love. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thanks. So this is the third and fourth part of the series. We went through from Abraham to Rome in the first session, and then from Rome to the British Mandate, second session. And now we're going to do the State of Israel very quickly, in 70 years from the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 to the present. And then also Elizabeth Little here is here to tell us about what PCUSA does in Israel and in the West Bank. And this is something I wasn't aware of before, that we have missionaries over there and we have policies our denomination does with respect to Israel Palestine. So it's a very informative, I think, for us to hear that. So I'm going to do this like a little bit of a speed. And I do have another disclaimer. I always have a disclaimer. My disclaimer in this session is, if you're not confused after hearing this, you haven't been listening. This is confusing stuff. So I start with this Holy Land, Israel and Palestine. And I said before, Israel is the state of Israel, but also it's a broader concept than that too. For a lot of Israelis, Israel is the whole promised land, Canaan, they're on the map there, everything. That's Israel. That's the land of Israel. And they're the children of Israel. So Israel is a broad concept for some and a small concept for others. In the same way with Palestine, we think of Palestine as being the West Bank and Gaza Strip. But actually, for a lot of Palestinians, it is Palestine as it has been for 2,000 years, as first a province of Rome and then ultimately a province of the Ottoman Empire. But the whole land. So one view is all of this is ours from both the Palestinians and Israelis. And another view is, no, it's not. So it's competing concepts. Anyway, let me move on. And earthly empires come and go, but faith in God endures. That's sort of the tagline. Okay, so I thought we'd start with the big picture. The world. Can somebody hit the lights, please? So maybe see a little better. Okay. Okay, so you're a friendly alien from outer space, and you see this is the world. And you're coming, and then you come to the Earth, and you meet your human host. And he says, oh yeah, that's all very well and good, but this is how we see the world. And the alien's a little confused. Where are all these lines here? Oh yeah, these are all the countries. These are all the tribes. So we have our Algerian tribe, and Libyan tribe, and Spanish tribe, and so forth. And the question the alien has is, well, who gets to decide where these lines are? Is that done in a friendly fashion? Do people just come together and say, oh yeah, let's have the boundary here? Or is there some discussion about that? I think we all know the answer to that. And by the way, also, whereas the world as God made it changes, but slowly, this map changes pretty quickly. So I didn't even notice this when I first got the slide, but you'll notice here at the up here is Yugoslavia. That doesn't exist anymore. That got created in 1918, and now it's Serbia and Croatia and Slovenia and so forth. And then here's the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So this map changes very rapidly. And also, so here's our focus right here, is this area here. This is the Holy Land. You can hardly see it. It's a tiny little bit here. That's Israel right there. Okay. So anyway, the reason I mention this is because when it comes to drawing the lines of where a country is and where it isn't, that's big in the discussion about Israel. So recap where we left off. I think I might have confused you all about the British mandate. So the Ottoman Empire is defeated in 1918. They sided with Germany. They were defeated. The Allies, including Great Britain and France. And Great Britain and France basically divide up the Ottoman Empire. And Britain gets what is now Iraq and Jordan and Palestine, Israel. And France gets Syria and Lebanon. And why do they do that? It's because they can, because they won. This is how they decided. And they call it mandates because they're saying, we're taking over this land for a while, like in a trusteeship, until the people get back on their feet and can govern themselves because they've been under the rule of others for so long. So that's the idea of the mandate. So within Palestine, both the Arabs and the Jews long for national states. And the British promised them both that they could have national states. And therein lies the rub. There were written declarations given to both sides, and both sides thought they would have that at the end. And both sides did not, because Great Britain decides to try to divide Palestine into Arab and Jewish sections, which is rejected at that time. But in the meanwhile, lots of Jews were coming into Palestine through the Zionist movement, and then during the Nazi regime in Germany, they started coming in. The British tried to forestall that, but more and more Jews were coming into the area and causing a lot of friction with the Arabs that are there. So there's a lot of violence. The Arabs are fighting the Jews are fighting the Arabs. They're both fighting the British. The British would get fed up and they say, I don't want this anymore. And after World War II, they give it to the UN and say, UN, you solve the problem. We're out of here. And I don't want to blame the Brits too much because the way I see it is all the world over, so easy to see, people everywhere just want to be free by the rascals. And I think that's true. And there's been a lot of talk about high school lately, and this is my favorite band in high school. So I had to throw that in.
How does Miss Fisher feel about them?
Yeah, she did not like the Rascals.
But the choir teacher wrote.
The founding of Israel. So in 1947, the UN votes to divide Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jerusalem is going to be an open international city somehow. And both the U.S. and USSR support the plan. That's key because after World War II, the two powers that become superpowers are the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The League of Arab States, that's now Egypt and Syria and northern African countries and Lebanon, they reject the plan. No Jews, because this has been, for 2,000 years, this has been Islamic-controlled land. We resist this entirely. The Jews don't like it. They don't like what they're getting, but they say, we'll take it. The British aren't happy. They're the ones who control the land right now. They get out, but they're unhappy because the Arabs have rejected it, and the British are still trying to favor the Arabs for geopolitical reasons. In 1948, the State of Israel is proclaimed. And here's what the UN does. The UN says, okay, you have your country now. Go get it. Go ahead. And what happens is immediately, well, actually, I should show you this. So this is how the UN came about doing this. So here are all the Jewish settlements in 1947, much greater than they were in 1917. About 30% of the population is Jewish of this area, Palestine. And they are given under the UN this land here in orange. And that's about 50%, but a lot of it's desert here. So they don't like it. The Jews don't like it. But so the Arabs said, no way, Jose, we don't like it at all. And there's Jerusalem as an open city. Okay, so that was the deal. So the population of Jews increased from about 7% in 1917 to 30% in 1947. Okay, so now what happens is Israel's created. The next thing that happens is there's the war. Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt attacked Israel immediately with small armies. So this is really interesting. After World War II, you have millions of combatants. The combatants here are like in thousands, and they don't have any equipment. They don't have like the Allies did. They have leftover parts and stuff like that. But Israel's better organized, despite the fact they're outnumbered, and they win. And they get control of Galilee. They get a bunch. I'll show you in a map in a second. And Jordan controls a little bit. And meanwhile, 700,000 Palestinians flee or expelled from areas that are within Israel. And this is the great disaster that haunts the region to this day. And also there's bloodshed. There were massacres on both sides. It was not a good scene. And the Palestinians would say it was ethnic cleansing that was taking place. The Israelis deny that. Israel establishes a state, and Jerusalem becomes its capital. It's not recognized at that time. And Israel's attacked by the Fedayeen, the guerrillas, and Arab states continue to refuse to recognize Israel. And basically, where we are now is where we are today in some sense. I mean, we can just stop right now and say the situation really hasn't changed because the choices are this: either Palestine is all Jewish, or it's all Arab, or it's some combination, the two-state solution, or it's maybe one state with a combination of all these people living in it. And they're the four choices you have. What transpires the next 70 years is just basically details on that issue. But here's what happens in 1949 after the First War. So I've changed the map. It's the best one I can get. It's a French map, but apologies for that. So this purple was the original. This is the UN mandated Israel, and here's what Israel got in 1949. And so they expanded. And this is really like what they call the pre-1967 lines. This is also known as the Armistice Line or the Green Line. So this is the Israel that is sort of nobody disputes. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is disputed, but that's the Israel you'd seen in your old maps. Okay. Okay, now let's do this in because you might have seen this in the Crown TV series, the Suez Crisis. Basically, this was a ploy by Britain and France to get Israel to attack the Suez Canal, which had been nationalized by Egypt. And then the British and French would come and rescue the canal. Well, it was a total mess. The United States and the USSR did not agree with that. And we put pressure on Britain and France to withdraw, which we did. But the significance of all this, the Suez Canal, is basically telling the world is that the sheriffs in town are the U.S. and the Soviet Union, the old colonial rulers, France and Britain. You no longer have much of a say. Okay, now you might remember this from your days. Okay, so the 6 Days War in 1967. Egypt. So here's how. The Soviet Union supports the Arabs now, and the U.S. supports Israel. It's basically how it works out. And we're supplying them with military equipment. Israel launches a preemptive strike in 1967. It's a hugely successful war for Israel. They captured the Gaza Strip, the Sinai, all Jerusalem, entire West Bank, and the Golan Heights. So this is what has created the issues now with the occupied territories. The results, Arab nations still refuse to accept Israel's existence. All their maps don't have Israel. Israel does not exist according to them, although de facto it does. The Arabs say, well, let's go back to the 1947 map, which they had rejected. Their position was untenable. But now Israel becomes an occupying force in a territory containing 1.25 million Arabs and another 300,000 Palestinian refugees. So now Israel has control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and also the Golan Heights, which actually was not part of the original Palestine, but I'll explain that in a second. But now, because the Arabs have kind of failed, the Palestinians themselves organize and they have their own voice, a Palestinian nationalism as opposed to Arab nationalism. Sorry. Oh yeah, so the UN resolves in 1967 that anything you take by force, any land you take by force, is null and invalid. And that makes it kind of difficult for us since we got California, Texas, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico from the Mexicans in the War of 1848. So we have to give a lot back, I guess, according to the UN. Okay, so this is what Israel got. Includes the Sinai Desert, which they give back to Egypt later on as a bargaining chip. So there's the West Bank. That's what we're talking about. That's the Dead Sea right there. That's the West Bank. There's the Gaza Strip, heavily populated. It's like 1.5 million or something like that. And then the Golan Heights, which is, I'll show you that just like, so that's the Golan Heights. We were up there. And it's not really heavily populated, but there's no way I'm not a military guy, but I think there's no way the Israelis are going to give up the Golan Heights because it's commanding all that land. That's looking into Syria. There's just no way, I don't think. Okay, I'm going to go through this stuff pretty quickly because I thought there might be time for people to have questions and so forth. But the PLO is organized in 1968. So now the Palestinians have a voice, their own voice. And there's lots of competing voices within the PLO. But what emerges is they believe that Israel needs to be destroyed entirely, just like the Arabs did. So that hasn't changed at all. And they want a homeland for the Palestinians. Yasser Arafat becomes chairman of the PLO. His party is called Fatah. And what does the PLO do? They coordinate terrorist attacks. That's what they're on Jewish establishments throughout the world. The PLO is ousted from Jordan because they're terrorists. They moved to Lebanon. They continue the terror operations on the northern Israeli settlements. And they also, remember Black September in 1972, I was in college when these Israeli athletes were killed in Munich. So bad stuff. Another war. It's not going to change anything. Israel is attacked on Yom Kippur, their Day of Atonement in 1973. You might remember that. Surprise attack. U.S. supports Israel. Surprise. USSR supports Egypt and Syria. Surprise. Israel's pushed back, but then they come back, and they're basically the lines are where they were when the war began. PLO continues with terrorism. The Arab League recognizes the PLO. Okay. UN declares Zionism a form of racism. The UN's getting their voice in, which is increasingly liberal. The Conservative Party in Israel, the Likud Party, comes into power. So now the lines are actually starting to tighten within both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. More hardliners are getting in. Except one ray of hope is Camp David. Remember with Jimmy Carter and Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, and Israel decides to give back the Sinai. They didn't really want it, but they did that. There's headlines from the Yom Kippur War. So the 1980s, it's getting bad. Sadat's assassinated by Islamic fanatic. That's his reward for making peace with Israel. Israel invades Lebanon. That was ugly. International. Remember, the Israelis opened up one of the camps of Palestinian Muslims to Christians who came in and massacred the Islamics. So Israel's starting to get bad publicity at this point. Then you got Iran, the Ayatollah. So that Iran becomes this is where it gets so confusing. So now you have Iran meddling in, and they're supporting something called Hezbollah. There was a Shia-based sect of the Muslim faith based in Lebanon, and they're up to no good. They're up to terror. And the Palestinians protest, the kids throwing rocks, and they get tear gassed in Gaza and the West Bank. Israel has a strong reaction to all this, and it starts to, it has PR problems, as we all know, because of so they were the underdog, and now they're kind of the bully. That's how it looks in the press. The PLO is ready for separate Palestinian and Israeli states. That's big. That allows the U.S. now, because we said the PLO has to recognize Israel. They said, okay, we'll recognize Israel. Big step. But then the right-wing government refuses to acknowledge the PLO and encourages Jewish settlement. This is where it gets really dicey. Here's the Jewish settlement in the West Bank. A little bit more about that. I'm sure Elizabeth will have something to say about that as well. The 1990s, hope and despair. Labor's back, so it's more lenient. But basically, Israel is polarized, and I think that's true to this day, between those who think that peace can be attained by having some sort of two-state solution, and for those who feel that all this land is ours, it's God's will, it was given to us by Abraham, and it's also suicidal to have a Palestinian state who is going to launch missiles into our country. There's some progress made with the Oslo Accords. Israel recognizes the PLO as a spokesman. There's a Palestinian Authority. There is some, but neither side is totally relaxed, and the riots keep occurring. You have now Hamas and the Sunni, so they're supported by the Gulf states. So you've got this Sunni Shia tug of war going on. So it's getting increasingly complex. More players are entering the chaos. Well, chaos is probably too strong a word, but entering the situation. Orthodox Jews are not prepared to give up any part of the Holy Land. Rabin, who was more lenient. He's assassinated for his good work by a Jewish fanatic. And Netanyahu's back in power in 1996. His slogan is peace with security, so it's a kind of a slow roll with peace potentially. So this is where we are. It's like, yeah, okay, two-state solution, but meanwhile, settlements in the West Bank. I'm going to go through this. So Camp David, another intifada, another revolt, and U.S. supports a resolution to call for a Palestinian state. Reality, Israel occupies the West Bank with military force because of the riots. U.S. publishes a roadmap. So our view is the U.S. is two-state solution is our details to be worked out. Israel begins building a West Bank wall, security wall, in addition to settlements. The wall condemned. Israel withdraws settlers from Gaza. They didn't want to be there anyway, so that's like some concession. There's like 20,000 Israelis there. More West outposts and settlements in the West Bank. Hamas becomes a spokesperson, particularly for the Gazians, or outside Palestinians in Gaza. Rocket attack from Gaza, Israel invades. It's just, there's some. I took a picture of that. This is, all the Israeli soldiers, you just got to marvel at them. They're all young and fit and happy. They look like winners. Obama wants a demilitarized Palestinian state. That's key. Originally, Palestinians said no to that, but there are some discussions about that. Palestine tries to get recognition through the UN. Palestine does get recognition through the UN as a non-member observer state. What does that mean? It's not really a sovereign state, but it's some progress. Hamas sends rockets. Israel responds. Peace talks. It's just no traction. Now Netanyahu in 2015 says no, the two-state solution is not going to work. More violence. Israel continues to legalize settler homes, and then President Trump officially recognizes Jerusalem as the capital, and the U.S. Embassy opens in Jerusalem in May. So that's where we are. So basically, as I said, things really haven't changed from day one, really. Oh, and then recently, you probably saw this, the Knesset said Israel. So this is, within Israel, you have an Arab minority, and you have Arabic as an official language. No longer. Hebrew is the only official language. And there's going to be undivided Jerusalem. There's no way that Jerusalem could be a capital, East Jerusalem could be a capital for Palestinians. So that is a hard line. The Arabs in Israel, the Arab citizens in Israel are furious because they've just been demoted to a second class, even more second class status in their view. So I'm making this up. Elizabeth can correct me when I'm wrong here, but two-state solution, dead. Well, it's been operating policy, but, it's the majority of Israelis I've read support a two-state solution, but the details. Meanwhile, there's 400,000 Israelis and growing living in settlements in the West Bank. So, and how do you square the status of Jerusalem as undivided capital and still capital of independent Palestine? How's that going to work? And is Palestine an economically viable state in any case? And President Trump says he's going to have a new peace proposal in the next couple of months. He says, I'm okay with one state, two state, whatever. That's our policy right now, whatever. So what does one state solution look like? People talk about that. Jews comprise 75% of the folks in Israel, significant Arab minority. Christians are like 2%, I want to say, something like that, Elizabeth. The Arabs feel like they are second-class citizens for, I think, very good reasons, although I can't articulate all of them right now. That they feel that effectively there's apartheid in Israel. But I just think about the math here. If you had the Gaza Strip and West Bank included into what would be Israel as one state, that would be 6.5 million Palestinians. They're my numbers versus 7 million Jews. How does that work? And that's the issue that Israel's faced, the dilemma. Because they are established as a Jewish state and also as a democracy. But what if they are in a minority in a democracy? How does that work? Right now, the climate seems to be there's no way that they're going to accept that kind of outcome where the Jews would be a minority. So the way I was thinking about this, we're traveling through thousands of years. So this 70 years is just too small a period of time. We don't know what's going to happen the next 400 years in Israel. But what we do know is that there's a status quo right now, but will the status quo last forever? Of course not. It will not at some point. So Oh, there's a current map of Israel once again. So Gaza Strip, tiny little piece of land with 4 Palestinians tucked in there. The West Bank, all the settlements are, well, I'll show you that. And there's Golan Heights. And there are the settlements. There's different maps of this, and depending on who the source is, I hope this is a good source. But you can see all the settlements now posted. It's all through the West Bank, and that is obviously an issue. So what do I say? 400,000 Israel, and 200,000 is also. So also in East Jerusalem, Israelis are living. So anyway, that's what I have, and it's not satisfactory, I know, and I'm supposed to give you hope. And I don't know.
just let Elizabeth.
No, I only confuse the subject.
I think at 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock there's a lot of hope out there, but I'm sorry if I probably failed in that.
What is the acreage? I mean, isn't Israel even like the size of Mecklenburg County? I mean, aren't we talking about
New Jersey?
I think all this is like all of this is like New Jersey.
Okay.
So it's tiny.
Yeah. So the intensive population
Yes.
in very tiny spaces
Yes.
makes people cranky.
And the population is increasing. Yes.
And when it's hot, and when it's hot,
I learned that growing up.
Well, before I could really start, I have to just remind you about our denomination and how we work. So when we say that the PCUSA has stances or take sides or has resolutions, you have to remember how they got to those resolutions. So we are a bottom-up denomination, so always remember that. So things that come from sessions go to presbytery. So if this church decides they want to make a statement on Israel or Palestine or something like that, our session would take it to the presbytery. The presbytery would have to vote on it. Then the presbyteries have to get other presbyteries to concur before it goes to our General Assembly. So all the information goes to our General Assembly. And then what comes out of our General Assembly is what our statements are as a denomination. So just remember that. It's not like people that get voted as our moderators can just suddenly say, this is our denomination's stance on this, on guns, or on tobacco, or recently on fossil fuels was the big stance this past General Assembly. So just remember that when I talk about the PCUSA, is that's how our denomination works. And you got to remember that. It's, once again, it's not just a bishop or a pope saying this is the stance. It comes from us. It comes from the people in the pews. Okay, so this is another map that you see. And the way I put it is, this was the 1947, and this is present, supposedly, where the Palestinians live. So who are the Palestinians in our views? The Christians are Palestinians, okay? So, Bill just kept talking about the Arabs and the Jews. Well, how do the Christians fall into that? So it's the Christians that are living in the West Bank, that they're getting kicked out of the settlements, that they are have the wall they have to get through and all the checkpoints. So it's very much affecting the Christian population in Israel and Palestine. And I'm just always going to use both names to the country. So it's so complex. Did anybody hear Walter Brueggemann when he spoke at the church last year? Okay. Well, he wrote a book on it. It's called The Chosen. Okay? And it's reading the Bible amid Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'm just going to point, to Bill's point, how complicated it is. And there's a lot of words, and you're not supposed to put a lot of words on a screen. But Brueggemann just reminds you that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian people is not a static issue that permits frozen conviction unresponsive to the changing textures of the conflict. Most unhelpful, so it seems to me, is the temptation to hold on to old political convictions that are not reconsidered in light of dramatically new circumstances. Because the issues change over time, it is essential that responsible thought and responsible policy should change as well. My own convictions concerning this conflict have changed considerably over time, a change that I judge responsible in the face of changing political reality. So I just wanted you to read this well-scholared person. He's reading and he's looking at the conflict through, very much a biblical lens. Because he's reading the Bible and he's a Bible scholar. So I just wanted to put out, it's hard for him too. Reading it through the Bible. Just so you know, and Bill just alluded to this, because of the Israeli occupation, Christians have been able to leave. Muslims, it's harder for Muslims to leave, but Christians have left. So in 1920, a tenth of the Palestinian population was Christian, and now you'll read it as low as 1 or as high as 3. So Bill's 2% probably fits pretty well. So it's not a large population by any means, but it is a population.
Where did they go when they left?
All over to Europe. Yeah, I came here. So as far as the PCUSA comes, so in 1819, when the PCUSA and other denominations were dividing up the world on who was going to evangelize and go where, the PCUSA, the Presbyterians, went to Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. We did not go to Israel, Palestine at the time. So you're not going to see a Presbyterian church on the corner. So now we pair with the Lutherans, mostly, and the Anglicans that are there. So that's a very long time. So when I started doing this research, when Bill asked me to start talking about it, it's very complex, our stances. But so you know, the PCUSA has something in its minutes from every General Assembly since 1969. Okay, that conflict has bothered us as a denomination since 1969, but it's an addressed an issue. So there was a huge resolution that came out in 1997, and it happened because that's when Bill was talking about a lot was happening over there, and in the denomination, the Presbyterians felt that we needed to start doing something, at least advocating for change. So I'm not going to read all those because Bill just went through them. But in 1997, we wrote this huge resolution. I mean, it's detailed. This is what Presbyterians do. We got to get into the weeds of everything. But it's very hard because when you take a side there, if you are Palestinian, if you come across as pro-Palestinian, then are you anti-Semitic? You know? And so it gets very, very, very complicated. So the first one that passed in 1997 by the 2009 General Assembly just had some very vague things, but it was just telling us as a denomination that we needed to study the issues, that each church needs to study the issues and pray for what makes lasting peace. Because it's truly what we're trying to strive for is peace in that region. Work to build support for these recommendations, if you would like to go through all of them. They're rather large. For it to challenge us as congregations to approach Jewish and Muslim leaders in our own communities to help open a dialogue. And to always study material. I have so many books that our denomination has written, but some books, like there's one, Zionism Unsettled, that now our denomination is taking a little step back because it has a little bit too much pro-Palestinian. It's very complicated. That's all I can say. Oops. So in 2003, we added to that resolution, and this is why I picked out this one ask, because I think a lot of y'all are going on the trip. It asked Presbyterians to travel to the region, as may be feasible and opportune, to visit with Christian partners and others to gain firsthand experience in understanding the issues and the dynamics behind the conflict, as well as the possibilities of peace. So our denomination is asking us, if we travel over there, to engage with Christians there and hear their voice. My own little interaction was Naim Atik, who Brueggemann points out in his book pretty much changed his mind. But I was at a mission conference, and this little man, he's about this tall, and he's now 81 years old, he was getting off a van with me at a mission conference. And I didn't know who he was, and I kind of shepherded him through dinner because I had been at this mission conference at this university before, and I took him to devotions that night. Well, I found out he was one of the big speakers, and I had no idea. And he's a Palestinian Christian, and he runs Sabil. And so when we were going on our trip 2 years ago, I thought, I'm going to go see him. So I emailed him our agenda from the church, and I'm ready to meet him. And his first sign was, there's not the word Palestine on this agenda. And he was offended that I would, he's like, why? You're not just coming to Israel, you're coming to Palestine as well. So that's when I changed I'm going to Israel and Palestine. I told everybody that I was going to Israel and Palestine. So that was Naeem Atik, and that's who I met that started changing me. He's 81, so in 1948, his family lost their house, and they've been considered refugees ever since. So a Christian Palestinian. This is just the interesting part, since I was told I didn't have a lot of time, since the hurricane combined our classes. But this is just one interesting thing that the GA did. In 2014, our General Assembly, by a very small margin, 310 to 303, approved divestment from 3 companies doing business mostly in the settlements and on the West Bank. So our denomination divested from Caterpillar, Hewlett-Packard, and Motorola Solutions. It was huge. If you had been at that General Assembly, they were petitioning, and there was rabbis there, and everybody had their stance. But I just wanted to point this out, that these things happen as our denomination. And I brought some of the articles from the New York Times. We hit every major, it was it's a 4-page when I print out, article from the New York Times. We hit every newsstand because the Presbyterians were divesting from 3 of their own companies, U.S.-based companies, because they were working in Israel. So if you think about it, they picked 3 companies that were hurting or helping the occupation or helping the checkpoints. So Motorola Solutions is the one that has the cameras on the checkpoints. Caterpillars are the ones that are just taking their things and knocking everything down so they can occupy the territory. And Hewlett-Packard was offering the computers. And so our denomination voted for this in 2014. So I only picked one big thing, is Bill said, the 2-state solution. In 2018 at our General Assembly this year, that was up for grabs. Is that the right thing anymore? So there's a lot going on, but since 1969 till today, every General Assembly of our church has had at least a statement on trying to make peace in this area. So I'm not going to get to that. So today, we have mission co-workers, and I put their prayer cards on your seat. They live in Bethlehem, both the couple and Doug Dix. So Sarah Makari wrote this statement. Every day they see the results of the occupation, which include high unemployment, shortages of basic necessities such as water, clothing, electricity, and heating, loss of land and livelihood, restricted movement, and displacement. So she's talking about the Christians that she sees. But then she also says, I salute the fortitude and tenacity of hope of the people of the land and dearly appreciate all that makes my living and serving here possible. Because they have to go through the checkpoints, but because they're Americans, they get through the checkpoints, but they still have to go through. They understand that when they divided the land, they kept the farms on the Israeli side, and the Palestinians didn't get the farmland. On the Gaza Strip, the Israelis now have it so the Palestinians can't fish six miles out, I think, something like that. So they just see how it's getting harder and harder to live. So that's Victor and Sarah. And this is really complicated, but if you read right here, Victor works for a program. How do you make it point? Yeah. So implements contextual and holistic programs that support the civic, cultural, physiological, the physical, educational, and spiritual well-being of Palestinians. So he's definitely working for an organization there. He's Egyptian, and Sarah was a daughter of a missionary, and they met when her father served at a seminary in Lebanon. And then Doug Dix, for all of us that went, we met Kate Tabor. She had a baby, and so she's back in the States, so Doug Dix is now the mission co-worker that does what she does. And anybody going on the trip, Gerald's hoping to connect with him, and you'll meet with him. His job is to connect U.S. churches with Christians when they visit the Holy Land. So there it is. Doug connects congregations and councils with indigenous Christians in Israel and Palestine. He's been on the ground in the Middle East for 20 years, so he's very knowledgeable. This article came out it comes out on October 1st. I found it, though. Just so you know, one of the pastors from the Lutheran Church, where this group, your travel next year, was going to visit, can't understand why so many Christians rush through the land where Jesus walked. So the next trip, it's when you go to Bethlehem. It's usually in and out. But y'all, the group going is going to stay a full day this time. So, and you all are going to worship there, from what I understand. And then Doug was quoted as saying, while spiritual programs should be part of any trip to the Holy Land, the political realities in which Palestinian Christians live, breathe, and witness to the risen Christ cannot be ignored. So that was his statement about it. So we want time for questions if we have them. So my thing, working for the PCUSA, you might not agree with anything. So I would ask that you go and remember that there's two narratives. Just there's two sides to every story, and I'm not telling you which one's right because I don't know which one's right. And as Bill says, it's complicated. Challenge yourself to hear the Christian narrative, and go as a Christian. Don't always think of yourself as an American or a Democrat or a Republican, but go with open eyes and open ears, because that's truly the way I think you're going to see it in a better light is from that perspective.